with you. It's been a hot May, and we are out to tackle a hot topic, that too in just 60 minutes, and some other questions by co-fanatics. So see what all we can cover. Have introduction to assessment of diastolic function of the left ventricle, adult and pediatrics, and at the very end we will touch upon Simpson's method for systolic function assessment, see aortic measurements, and any other questions. No pressure at all that this is going to be complete. Lots of incomplete information, in fact. And whether my goal achieved, if at least or 10% of the audience here today attempts to obtain diastolic function in diastasis within the next few weeks at the Trinity, or at least reads up diastolic function assessment. The matter in pediatric cardiology actually is that we pediatric cardiologists do structure. It's the adult cardiologists who do function, systolic, diastolic. We feel our anatomy, the defects, VSDs, DORVs, single ventricles, exotic diagnoses like Henkel's and LV to aorta channel, LPS sling, crisscross heart, and so on and so forth. Function assessment, most of the times we are extremely limited. Some DCM, definitely the dilated cardiomyopathies, the immediate post-op patients, the TET patients on follow-up for the RV side of function assessment. Keep hitting wrong button. So for systole part, it's pretty all right. We have a list of indices we use, very much less than the adult people, but yes, we have our list. But when it comes to diastole, we pretty much draw a big blank. But should be getting serious about diastology. Look at this chart over here. On axis are ears, and on the Y are patients. This is a clinic data from some of the Western world. Bars go over specific age populations. At the bottom of each column, you see these blue live births with CHT, while those are children with CHT. The yellow is 18-year-olds with CHT, and the blue is adult population. So look here in 1990-94 column. It's adult population is minority, and what happens in now where we are now, adult population is the majority. What it did is that it's going to become even more so. So what it lies for us is that we will be having to deal with adults whether we like it or not, and adults with CHT are an issue altogether. A big problem with them is also heart failure, and failure obviously means systolic and diastolic failure. So we have to know how to evaluate diastolic function. We need to know what the adult world is doing as far as diastology. Obviously, pediatric patients, we do want to get into diastology to try to prognosticate amongst DCM patients what the morbidity is likely to be. So the group of LVOTOs that we have, the chemotherapy patients, where you want to pick up the earliest sign of heart failure, of heart compromised function on echo, to debate between restrictive and cardiomyopathy and constrictive pericarditis, and also diastolic evaluation of the RV, which we're going to touch upon here. For us in pediatrics, we get cooperative patients like the adults too. The heart rate is much faster, that how the waves are seen on atrial imaging, Doppler imaging. Adult guys, We don't single number cutoff point to remember for various things. Each group has its own normative data. The process of relaxation has been very well studied. Well, it's getting better, decade by decade. In adult and pediatrics, it's still unknown to a large extent. So we begin. My first question for you all. This is going to be an interactive session, I hope. Please ask questions. My question is, how do we perform interrogation of the mitral valve for diastolic function assessment? Do you use a continuous wave or a pulse wave? Doppler or E is fine as long as you get a spectral Doppler tracing. I can move on. This is P, isn't it? So somebody says PWD, and that's probably right. Next is diastole. That's ventricular relaxation start. You have CG tracing given over here. Where does diastole start? Does it begin at the beginning of the P wave, at the of the R wave, at the T wave, or the end of the T wave? On this, I'm not going to demand answer. Somebody says beginning of T, somebody says end of T. I see the answers there. So you figure out by the end of this in this talk, I hope. The end, where ventricular relaxation end? Does it end when the P wave is over, or when the Q wave begins, maybe, or at the peak of the R wave? Something for us to reflect upon. How is diastole reflected on the ECG? So somebody says end of P, somebody says end of R. I think we have 3% distribution each for all of the three answers. Obviously, only one is correct. Next is, what is the systolic diastolic ratio time-wise at a normal heart rate of 75? Ratio. So is it 1:1? Is it 3:5? Is it 1:5? What are your thoughts on that? 1:1. I'm happy people applying. Somebody says 3:5. Somebody says 1:5. So again, 33%. All right. Next, true or false? Ventricular diastole is an energy-consuming process. When relaxation, does it consume energy or not? False. So we have 3 truths, 4 truths. Okay. Next. No tissue Doppler imaging in children don't exist yet. A, B statement, and C don't know, don't care. There are no C's here. False. Okay, somebody says true. All right. So we have 50% vote there for true and false. So you should be back to basics here, didn't you? So we have what ventricular diastole, time when ventricle relaxes. Diagram over here. At the T wave. The T wave is what shows up for depolarization of the ventricle. At the big end of the T wave is when ventricular diastole begins. For explanations, cardiac cycles, and everything start with where T wave, so when diastole beginning kind of falls in the middle of the whole diagram, and where it ends is at the peak of the R wave right here. So you go from here right up to this, up to the R ends. The way of looking at it is ventricular systole is when R wave peaks to when T wave ends. The time it's diastole, ventricular systole and ventricular diastole. So question 1 was that the diastole begins at the end of the T wave. Or if everyone can see this. Okay, so the Vigor's diagram that we used multiple times in physiology. Go back to it now. Look, what's easy recognizable is at the bottom, the PQRST. Right? And then look at this. This is the LV pressure, this big one. And right here, almost a straight line with a few bumps, is the left atrial pressure. We are going to move with this line drawn at the aortic valve closure point. This is with where the T wave ends, and this is the beginning of ventricular diastole. Come this way to the peak of the R wave is, and this is where your mitral valve closes, that diastole ends. We'll get into all the details of this as we move on. So, big valve marks the beginning of the rapid ventricular filling period. That ventricular filling period of slow ventricular filling, that's called diastasis, and come on this side then where the P wave is, and that's when the atrial systole happens. Move the video box. All right. So in detail, because whole of diastology is about this marks ventricular diastole starts at the end of T wave with the aortic valve closing. The line, the isovolumic relaxation period, valve has closed and the mitral valve opens at the yellow bar. Between lines is the time when both the valves are closed, the aortic and the mitral, and the ventricular pressure is rapidly coming down. You see the rapid decline in the ventricular pressure. So it remains the same. It's isovolumic relaxation time. The phases begin with when the mitral valve opens, 2 when the atrial and the left ventricular pressures come to be almost the same. This yellow and the green bars is the rapid ventricular filling period. Most of the filling is done in this time. To come around this time, like this, around the picture, the ventricular period starts after the pressures have equalized, and at the atrial systole, there's no line here for that, and last is atrial systole. At the end of atrial systole is this red bar. So diastole has phases of 4. First is the IVRT, relaxation time, beginning with clear of the aortic valve and ending with opening of the mitral valve. The rapid filling time, this period, that's when there is no pressure difference between the left atrium and the left ventricle. This actually, velocity over here. So you got blowing mitral valve at velocity in rapid ventricular filling. That velocity is very, very low, close to 0, less than 20 centimeter per second diastasis. And then in the last phase of ventricular diastole, there is atrial systole when the velocity goes up again in the mitral flow. The pie chart. The heart rate of 75 beats per minute, 8 seconds per cardiac cycle, systole occupies 0.3 seconds. Remaining time is ventricular diastole, so that's 0.5. So that's one way of answering that pre-test question, that if you take ventricular systole diastole, then the ratio is 0.3 or 2.5 or 3:5. But if you look at complete cardiac systole, that only lasts for 0.4 seconds, because you've got the atrial systole come here for 0.1. You have systolic diastolic ratio actually being 1:1 right over here. 0.4 here, 0.4 here. Let's move on to phase 1. Once again, the isovolumic relaxation phase, remember, is when the aortic valve closes, the mitral valve hasn't opened yet, ventricle is relaxing, there's sudden pressure drop rapidly, LV peak systolic pressure in an adult is 120, in an infant is 80 mmHg, so that has to come down to close to 0. So pressure drop, and it ends when the mitral valve opens. Mitral valve opens because the diastolic pressure becomes lower than the left atrial pressure. Isovolumic relaxation time. So the LV is relaxing very quickly. And it's all about analyzing the role of this LV and also how it fills in the late phase of diastole. Ventricular filling period. When the valve opens, it does so because the left atrial pressure is higher than the left ventricular pressure, and that pressure difference creates good flow. What happens in this period, excepting the fetus and the neonate, and this is what generates the E velocity of the mitral valve pulse Doppler. The E velocity. It reflects the health of rapid ventricular filling. The velocity will shoot up, will increase in height if the left atrial pressure is high. Whether due to something like mitral stenosis or in the absence of any stenosis or regurgitation of the mitral valve, if the dysfunction is enough to elevate left atrial pressure, then the wave shoots up. However, diastolic dysfunction. When the pressure is not high, the pressure gradient between the left atrium and the ventricle decreases, so the peak E velocity falls. Now E is taller than A because there's more filling happening in E versus A. Of E by A is less than 1, it's usually 0.8. In diastolic dysfunction, phase 3 is diastasis. Remember, when the LA and the LV pressures are the same, hardly any flow happening. The leg hasn't started contracting yet, and whenever there is tachycardia or most of our pediatric population, diastasis is very, very less. The PWD Doppler of the mitral valve showing E and an A wave, and in between, when there's diastasis, you actually see some flow happening. When high, when this doesn't touch the baseline or length to it, and the other parameters that are in agreement, then you can come to a conclusion that there is diastolic dysfunction. These are the things which are confusing, and many of the times in our pediatric side, we see a lot of E Asian, just a single wave. So is that what this is? Absolutely not. That fusion might be normal, or what I'm talking about is something totally different. I'm talking about in the period of diastasis when you have two separate peaks, E peak and A peak, and in between you have some happening denoted by some velocity of blood captured in your spectral Doppler tracing. So that puts diastolic dysfunction. The atrial systole, that when the atria contract and push in blood into the this part of ventricular diastole has to do with how compliant it is. In dysfunction, relaxation is impacted first. Remember, first bit the IVRT, and when the peak A happens on the mitral valve pulse Doppler, that's the part which is impacted first in ventricular diastolic dysfunction. So we've gone over the 4 phases of diastole. Now, diastole, is it all relaxation? relaxing, but doesn't mean that there's no energy being spent. This diagram, this portion is the isovolumic relaxation time, and when your pressure is higher in the pressure. So that point is captured over here. There's actually a lot of energy being spent because it takes energy to come out of the cell. So it impacts the energy provided to the heart, whether it is ischemia or other things, is going to impact relaxation. It's actually a energy requiring process, and when there is systolic dysfunction of the ventricle, there's going to be diastolic dysfunction of some degree or the other. In that phase, in a IVRT, to the rapid ventricular filling, is that the ventricles untwist. You may have heard this term, the twisting and torsion, how when the contraction is not just about longitudinal compression, not just about radial or circumferential compression, it is so about how the ventricle twisting and torting consistently. So it's if you are wringing a mop to get the water out of it, to get to move out in a particular direction. Similarly, the LV rings itself from the apex towards the base where the aorta is situated, so that blood is expelled out into the aorta. So torsion happens because of different of muscle movement in apex versus the base, also the subepicardial layer of muscle versus the subendocardial. This thing in contraction. What in relaxation is that it untwists and imagine creates a powerful suction effect. In that suction effect attracts blood then from the left atrium into the LV, and the suction effect is impacted because if the LV is not allowed to untwist properly, whether it's energy deficiency or something in the myocardium, then your diastolic parameters obviously suffer. So we uses of diastole beginning with IVRT, isovolumic relaxation time, and ending with atrial systole. The couple phases deal with how the LV relaxes, and the next phase is where the LV has to distend. It's already relaxing, but now it has to distend. It has to do with how stiff it is, or in other words, how compliant it is. LV relaxation requires energy. Now, it is able to study all four phases of diastole. There are tools here. Number one, pulse W, Doppler. We put a gauge across the mitral valve, and we study velocity of blood as it pushes into the left ventricle. It's comparatively high velocity. We look at the E and A waves and the EA ratio, and also look at a couple time intervals, including the VRT and the deceleration time. Is two of our tools for assessing diastolic dysfunction. So here we are looking not at blood, we are putting very same sample gauge on the tissue, and tissue obviously doesn't move at the same velocity as blood does. It's very much lower. So your peak velocity of blood as it rushes into the left ventricle in early diastole is, let's say, 70 centimeters per second. If you show how much it moves in that phase, it will be like 10 centimeters per second. So velocity, you need to adjust your settings to capture that. And these days, almost all machines have presets for tissue Doppler imaging. Very little adjustment has to be done. And we look at the which are mirrors of the mitral PWD, which is E prime and A prime waves. We are able to look at the IVRT. Now, combining the mitral and the tissue Doppler imaging is one important index, which is the E by E prime ratio. Very, very important for diastology. Tool number 3, allot that number to the left atrium and how its volume assessment affects us in diastolic dysfunction. Number 4 is pulmonary venous pulse Doppler. Very essential. Number LV, systolic function. We said about diastole, the components being energy dependent, and if G is impacted, supply of energy, and it's affecting your systolic function, it's definitely going to impact the diastolic function as well. Better you start you got the systolic function of the ventriculus before you get into evaluating diastolic function. The P is very, very important as well, because if you realize, obviously they are connected circuits across the pulmonary capillary bed. On one end is pulmonary artery, on the other end is the pulmonary venous and left atrium. So if your atrial pressure is high because there is diastolic dysfunction, the pressure will be high and the pulmonary arterial pressure will be high. So use that. Use that to determine if your left atrial pressure is high. Myocardium, look to see if there is hypertrophy, etc. And clue that the myocardium is not normal will help you at the diastolic function of the patient. These tools in detail, begin with mitral PWD. By obviously use it in the apical 4-chamber view, and use the gate at the tip of the mitral leaflets, the weak tip. I have slides devoted exclusively to that. So before on to the next slide, let's also add that this is reliable when there's AV block or there's sinus tachycardia or your waves are fusing. Look, wave happening when, remember, your LA pressure is higher than the LV pressure. The rapid filling happens in the E and none of it happens in the A. Okay, so this is the most important slide, one of the most important slides of this presentation, where gate should be diastolic dysfunction. It has to be pulse wave Doppler, and the patient has to be right here at the tip. Not at C, not at B, not at A, not at E or F either. Now, does it matter? Because clearly, that the pulse gate moves into the left atrium. Here, your C's come down. And law of diastology is based upon the peak velocities and the ratios. Something which looks like this, when actually it's this, up your analysis, and it doesn't fit with the rest of the echo and how the patient is, you're going to, oh my goodness, diastology bad, diastology sucks. And the truth is that we didn't do a good job of getting down. It's important to keep the gate. It has to be at the very tip. It doesn't have to be somewhere higher up into the LA. Garbage out, your analysis is only as good as your data. Don't bother getting into EA ratio and other stuff if you haven't practiced getting good pulse wave Dopplers. There are adult imaging colleagues do function all the time. Most time they're analyzing function of their patients. So let them. Make cardiologist your buddy. Read good with them. Okay. So mitral valve inflow Doppler, we learned where to put the sample gauge. Now the various waves. Or what all we study, IVRT, EA ratio, and the D cell time. Remember, in patients patients with, for example, dilated cardiomyopathy and reduced ejection fractions, the mitral inflow Doppler abnormalities correlate better with functional class and prognosis compared to just looking at EF. You know, disease associated with EF be stuck at EF of 20% and different patients, one who is very sick and the other who isn't that sick clinically, and difference may lie in the diastolic parameters. So it makes sense to pay attention to diastolic dysfunction when looking at DCM. Let me get to another slide. The first, before the E happens, is the IVRT. Here, this is the period isovolumic relaxation time, beginning end of T wave on ECG, coinciding within the aortic valve closes. If it drops pressure with the equilibrium because the mitral valve hasn't happened yet, so the IRT has a cutoff, obviously, and if relaxation is impacted, the IVRT will be impacted. If it's longer to relax, the IVRT increases. But left atrial pressure is high, and that happens in severe diastolic dysfunction. Then pressure gradient between the LV and the LA pressure increases, and hence the RT decreases. The mitral valve opens sooner. Why mitral valve opens sooner? It opens sooner because the left atrial pressure is higher. It pushes the valve open little sooner. These have a nice distribution going on over here. For various age groups, they have cut off. It becomes complicated. Moving E by A in diastolic dysfunction. When relaxation alone is affected, the PE velocity decreases because the force is the LV pressure gradient. Diastolic dysfunction, the LA pressure hasn't risen yet. LV pressure might be a bit higher. So peak comes down. When that happens, there's a lot of the left atrium waiting to be emptied into the LV. So compensatorily, the A velocity increases. So the A, where A is the denominator, obviously becomes less than 0.8 or whatever the normal is. Example, this is E, this is A. The rate is 3.4, which is weighted, and this is in a situation where there's dysfunction where the left atrial pressure has risen significantly. Same in severe diastolic dysfunction, left atrial pressure rises and EA pressure becomes higher and higher. Change as diastolic dysfunction worsens. So the normal in diastolic dysfunction, the E wave actually goes down, while the ratio increases. Do we data for mitral PWD for pediatric population? Yes, we do. We have reference coming from 2015. Then with 33 healthy subjects, pediatrics, and generated these various graphs. The dark blue is the mean, while the dark red is the +2 -2. You've got velocity peak, you've got A velocity, you've got E and A ratio, so everything is displayed according to what the BSA of the patient is. mitral valve Doppler. What about tissue Doppler imaging? So again, we use the apical 4-chamber view. We optimize the depth. We make sector is narrow so that we have more resolution. And use the TI setting in the machine. It's a sample gate alveoli but tissue into the myocardium. And show that the Doppler cursor is aligned to the movement of the tissue. Adult because it's got the heart inverted. So here shows suboptimal DTI beam alignment. So here, while the direction of annular motion is this way, so this is going to impact how waves are. Whereas in this optimal beam alignment, and you're looking at it live, you're looking to see how the tissue is moving. So the direction of annular movement is aligned to where the cursor is, and this will what will give you a correct TDI tracing. So in T, look at E prime, A prime, we look at IVRT, and we look at the E by E prime ratio also. Look at here you've got the lateral mitral annulus. So that's directed below the baseline. The first deflection, right, after your T ends, and around 16 to 18, centimeter per second. Here, 1.2. So that's E prime right there. You can make A, and the S here reflects systolic function. So that's a whole different topic out there. And if your machine is tailored that way, you will get N by E prime ratio if your mitral PWD is already taken, lateral annulus. You similar for the median annulus. The annulus, also called the septal, is kept the atrial septum down near the ventricular. How velocity will be on your LV is like a coiled spring. Bouncing. So that's what's happening over here. That's reflected. Impact it. The that we mean how to velocity. So, pretty it reduces. It doesn't increase. It as much. The relaxers that impacts the peak, and RC impacts the peak. So can everyone hear me? The connect. Septal display versus the lateral. Remember, the lateral is always higher than the septal because how much the myocardium moves at the moves more than it does at the septal. Number one. Number two, when we come around to analyzing, what we actually do is we average out the two. There are two schools of thoughts, but the most current one is it's better to average out. And out of E prime and the A prime, we concentrate on the E prime and average out the septal and lateral and use it for analysis. You know, one is 6.7, the other is 10, so what should I use? Because for showing something as normal is 8, let's say for a particular age range, then you average the two and look at the mean number. For carrying out the E by E prime also, you average out the E prime and then final E by E prime ratio for the heart. The P, like I mentioned before, constantly reduces as LV relaxation and as LV compliance suffers. It's pretty faithful. It's like peaky wave, if you recall. The peaky wave in early diastolic dysfunction behaves differently compared to how it looks when there is severe diastolic dysfunction. It's like a faithful peak east. The ratio also gets very high marks for helping us in understanding diastolic dysfunction. The E ratio directly correlates with the LV filling pressure. You can be reassured that there's normal filling pressure. If your E by E prime is more than 15, it predicts you've got elevated filling pressure. In between is a gray area. So as said before, you have to average out the septal and lateral E velocities, then use that to generate the E by E prime. Less than 8 means normal LV filling pressure, and more than 14 means high filling pressure. We normal data for TDI for pediatric population as well. The very same paper published in 2015 has generated E velocities and S and A, and also E by E prime ratios. So if it with a BSA of 0.5, your E ratio, top limit of normal is around 9. There are tables available from other publications. This is Shiva's book, this table. The data actually items published in 2004. Summary, we're running short of time. This is a summary of mitral PWD and tissue Doppler. Function worsens. So this is normal. E velocity is less, and then as dysfunction increases, E velocity goes on increases. For the Doppler, E prime velocity comes down as diastolic dysfunction increases. I mentioned Dr. Liv Hatley. Whenever we talk about Doppler ultrasound, she was the one who started using it and coming to useful conclusions. She's in Norway. A tool that we don't utilize is tool number 3, which is left atrial volume, and it gives chronic diastolic dysfunction. And the way to measure it, your chamber view, you have to get into the lowest rib space possible. That creates this kind of view, so this will help decrease the foreshortening. You have to freeze the frame, loop, and right to just before the microwave closes. That just opens up. So when it's maximally filled up, the left atrium, take it and then go get your probe dated 90 degrees so that you get a 2-chamber view at the apex and get your LA volume sorted out there. The machine will spit out a left atrial volume biplane. LA size increases, it means diastolic dysfunction, but there are ifs to it. If stenosis or mitral regurgitation, obviously the reason for left atrial enlargement is something different. Similarly for bradycardia, or if there's anemia, arrhythmias, you can use left atrial volume for studying diastolic dysfunction. But it's a very helpful parameter. In early diastolic dysfunction, LA volume will be normal. LA increases as your left atrial pressure increases. Cumulative data. So this from 2012. You can use these scores to see left atrial what is normal or not. Quick point is that you should know where to gate your data, where to obtain information from. If you mess up there, no use proceeding further. Use normative data. E prime is very good because it's faithful, and E prime is also very good. Do not forget LA volume. Also remember that diastole has two components. The first component is relaxation. LV relaxes, and then is the relaxed LV then distends as the atrium pushes blood into it. So that's compliance. Diastolic dysfunction affects relaxation first and then compliance. Next slide. Covered in the last 40 minutes. Confused, you're not alone. Too much geology, too variation, all that and more. Which is why and the European colleges of cardiology came together and this in 2016. And it's freely available, talks about diastolic dysfunction evaluation, and they've really simplified things, really simplified it. Before we take you through the two flow charts that they have, remember some golden rules. Number one, thou shalt have a pretest probability in mind before mitral or tissue Doppler indices interpretation. What means is that so you've listened to the patient's history, you have examined her, looked at your heart thoroughly, looked at EF, looked at the ruled out hypertrophy, and you're evaluating diastolic dysfunction. You will rely on a single value. You find if the LV filling pressure or the LV pressure is elevated. Used to obtain good mitral, pulse Doppler and DTIs and optimal tracing. You will stick the Z-scores in your lab so you can refer to them, and reports you compare the current value with what it was previously. Tabulate your data for C evaluation. More importantly, if you know the dragon, don't go out pulling out your smartphones and open up Wikipedia to find out what a dragon looks like, how many claws it's supposed to have. What I mean is, when you have severe systolic dysfunction, for example, you're going to have diastolic dysfunction. If yours aren't adding up and giving you a clear picture, there's a problem with your data, or there are things impacting how you're studying your diastolic dysfunction. Don't be confused by the of data that you get that doesn't fit in. Recognize that there's diastolic dysfunction. There's bound to be diastolic dysfunction when there is ejection. Don't head away from diastology if your indices don't add up. I encourage you to, understand it further. So, flow charts that Jay's employed. So please, once this lecture is done, go back and look at these and stick them up in your echo lab. What is, first find out if your ejection fraction is normal or not. So if your fraction is normal, these four things, E by E prime, and then the E by itself for the septum and the laterum. That the third is the TR velocity, which remember means the PA pressure, whether it's pulmonary hypertension or not. And fourth is the left atrial volume. I'm going to go look at the numbers and mention right now because you won't remember them, I don't remember them. Easier to stick them up in the echo lab and refer to them when your next adult patient walks in, or refer your pediatric charts when you have peds patients. So any of these four parameters, E by prime, E alone, PA patient, and the LA volume. Or you have more than 50% positive, you have diastolic dysfunction. and discussion perhaps. One which is positive, your diastolic function is normal. And between indeterminate. Simple. Another for when the EF is reduced. When you know your systolic function is reduced, there is diastolic dysfunction. It will happen. Question is how much? Is it early diastolic dysfunction or late? So then you first look at your E by A ratio, and if it is abnormal, which in adults means a ratio more than 2, there you're looking at elevated left atrial pressure and grade 3 diastolic dysfunction. This may be simple. If it's not so, at the other extreme, if it is less than 0.8, you have dysfunction. In by A is more than 0.8 but less than 0.2, then you have to look at other things. But the same things we looked when the EF was normal, which is E by E prime, the TR velocity, which is the PA pressure, and the volume index of the left atrium, 4 ml per meter square. All three are abnormal. They have grade 2 diastolic dysfunction, elevation of left atrial pressure. If they are less than that, then you know there's diastolic dysfunction, but you really are not in a position to give an accurate estimation of left atrial pressure. They're saying, listen, you know, all this, whatever diastology we do, it has its limitations. So cannot determine means cannot determine until we are wiser. It's 3 minutes left to 9, and I'll take a little quiz now. I'll put a box right up here so I can see your answers. First, you select the true sentence. There's only one true sentence. The first is E velocity measures LV compliance. This is E prime. Is that false? E velocity, the E, that is blood velocity, E velocity, measures LV relaxation. A is elevated and early diastolic dysfunction. Is this true? And E prime is a sensitive marker of diastolic dysfunction. True. All the others are false. So somebody says D and somebody else also. I am pretty happy with that. Let me quickly refresh it for everybody. So velocity across the mitral valve reflects I'm sorry. So E velocity reflects relaxation normally. Compliance. Time is a very sensitive marker of diastolic dysfunction. It is abnormal in diastolic dysfunction. The A velocity, E by A, in early or mild diastolic dysfunction is actually not elevated. It is reduced. Mitral PWD sample gate is to be kept where? A, D, E, F. So the somebody says is D, most people say D. That's true. You want it to be neither too high. Your velocities will come out skewed. Too low. Very vital. With your lateral TDI sample gauge, should you keep it at the annulus, the hinge point, or a few millimeter into the myocardium from the hinge point of the lateral annulus of the mitral valve? So the answer is C, correct. You have to keep it in the myocardium. You have to move along the hinge point and myocardium to get a true tracing. Okay, with false sentence, time is low, it means diastolic function could be normal. If it's low, diastolic function could be normal. Is that true? If it's low, it could be a diastolic function. The function high abnormal. E by A means high LAP. So out of these three, there's only one which is false. So some C, or that's from the last question, I don't know. Let me go over this again. The question says A is false. Which is less than 8 means diastolic function is normal. It's a good cutoff. Even in pediatrics, in general, if E by E prime ratio is less than 8, means you're doing good as far as diastolic function. Then up as diastolic dysfunction worsens. Send B, in early diastolic dysfunction, the E by A will be low. And send 3, high E by A means high LAP, absolutely correct. And high LAP means you're at more severe end of diastolic dysfunction. Oh, let me just skip over it. Okay. Is this flowchart we had seen in patients with normal EF, looking at these 4 parameters, right? So how many parameters do you want out of these to be positive to call it diastolic dysfunction? So, oops. Now, you want more than 50%. More than 50% of these abnormal. You can do these numbers for adults, and for pediatrics, try and use your charts, for in diastolic dysfunction range. Okay, this one, especially for me, state golden rules of diastology. So we have to keep in mind. I would give status to get tracing, taking time to keep the gait properly, to recognizing that there will be diastolic dysfunction if fraction is impacted. Not interpret single values, always use combinations. Okay, now we actually have no time. I'm going to skip pulmonary hypertension and M mode evaluation. I'm sorry, I don't do it. I did find literature about it. Seems to me there's enough data which says that it's not reliable. There are better ways, and I'm sure some will be covering pH evaluation in echocardiography for you. Valve measurements, there's this 2010 publication from American Society talking about how to take aortic valve measurements. So just follow those, and you have the valve opened out over here in systole. Measure hinge point to hinge point. That is where you're measuring the aortic annulus. Then you measure the sinus distance here. This measurement aortic root. Then the tubular junction and the ascending aorta. That's how we measure it. That's all the ascending aorta there. The TACI, remember this is tricuspid annular plane systolic excursion. So what we need to do is, after we obtain our 4-chamber view, we actually switch in, we raise the depth and switch on color, and we use the M mode cursor and keep on that echogenic spot over there, which is the annulus of the tricuspid valve, and we look to see where the high point is and point. Now we use color. Why color? I'm almost done. Because it helps us differentiate where your annulus is, peak is changing. So blue, red. You see that over here? So right here is where I would take 1 point, and the same point would be right here, where again the blue, red changes. So when I measure it or somebody else measures it, they will always be measuring it at that point. So this tip given to me by my helpful adult cardiology colleague next door. For the LV, you ask your adult cardiologist to guide you first something, and here we are optimizing how the LV looks, and go ahead and it guides you. It says, select the biggest diastolic, the most distended LV that you can get with the mitral valve closed. Just as it closes, that's when the LV volume will be the most, so it will give out a tracing, and then you go ahead and you optimize it. Make sure you include the mitral papillary muscles within the cavity of the LV, and do scroll and get your smallest volume, and that's your systolic frame. You know all the steps there. Then go and get a 2-chamber view and repeat that, and it will give you a biplane ejection fraction. One very important number that it also gives out is the end-diastolic volume by biplane. Please get a habit of evaluating end-diastolic volume. It's a much better marker of LV size compared to our LVIDD. So if it and compare to adult values, you can serially follow up with it. So the next time you have a VSG with LVVO, try looking at the Simpson biplane and the EDV that it generates. I have paused here. I'm exceeding time, so thank you very much. Kavian?